Hello and welcome to the second video in our partnership with Precision Hydration. First video is all about staying hydrated on the run, whereas in this one we're going to look at how you can fuel your runs. Once again we're speaking to Andy Blow, who's the founder of Precision Hydration, a keen runner and a sports scientist, and in general just a font of great knowledge on everything to do with running nutrition. In this video we're going to cover off everything you need to know about fueling with carbs on the run and hopefully help you set up a plan to make sure you nail your next race. Let's go! Last time out we talked all about hydration, this time's all about fueling, and I guess the first question would be, this is a fairly new area I think for Precision Hydration. Why have you moved into fueling alongside the kind of classic hydration stuff?
Yeah, it is a good question because the name says hydration, we now say fueling, but we've always worked very closely with athletes, our customers, elite athletes that we consult with, and when any conversation about hydration obviously tends to inevitably stray into fueling as well. What really pushed it to the fore was, the COVID-19 pandemic. We spent a lot of time at home on video calls with athletes, with customers, and all of those conversations we talked about fueling. So once we started to get back to work, we decided to accelerate our plans to sort of talk fueling so that we could offer a much more comprehensive overview in that. So we've been building tools and products in the last 18 months really to get ready for that.
Fantastic. So what we're going to cover in this video really is how to plan your fueling strategy to get it right, and I guess we're going to throw in a big incentive here maybe and say that if you do get it right, are you going to hit the wall in a marathon?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because a lot of people associate running a marathon with it hitting the wall as an inevitability. It's kind of not if, it's when.
Yeah.
But I would definitely argue that if you get this element right, then you can run a marathon reliably without hitting the wall.
Most runners now, certainly, especially if they are running marathon, know that they need carbs in some format, and I guess it's just important to really refresh it. Why do we need carbs, and why do we need to keep taking them during these long efforts?
Yeah, so carbohydrate is the fuel of high intensity exercise. There is a massive debate, and has been a massive debate raging for a while now, around whether you can become truly fat adapted to exercise, and obviously I grew up doing endurance sport in the 90s when carbs were unquestionably king.
Yeah.
They've they took a back seat for a while, but have started to come to the fore again, because I think the whole question around fat adaptation is a valid one, and it's one where if you're doing very long events, and if you are ultras, really long ultras, multi-day events and things like that, you want to be able to rely on more than just burning carbs to provide your energy. But when you're running at a high percentage of your VO2 max, as most people are if they're trying to do a short race or a marathon, then the amount of carbohydrate that you can burn is directly related to how fast you can run.
Right.
And so basically the ability to not only burn carbohydrate but take it in, tolerate it, all of those things become important skills. And I think what we're seeing these days is a trend towards marathon runners in particular really eating and taking in a lot more carbs than they used to. It used to be a bit like the Ron Hill days. It was nil by mouth. You had to kind of be a real man and tough it out. And what that proved was actually there were some phenomenal times run on very little carb intake. It is doable, but it doesn't make it optimal for everyone. And often you do run the risk of kind of running out of energy, because ultimately you've got even a really fit, well-trained athlete who's well-fed has probably only got 90 minutes or so of glycogen stored in their muscles, which is the storage form of carbohydrate. Once you've burned through that, or the majority of that, fatigue is going to kick in hard. And so extra carbs coming in spares the muscle glycogen, enables you to keep a high level of performance right to the end, and that's the idea.
And when we talked in the hydration video, we talked a lot about very individualized difference of salt in your sweat. If carbs, is it fair to say it's not really that varied? There is some kind of more general rules you can look at?
Yes, hydration is very contentious, because there's so much variation between what different people need. And different people need different amounts of carbs as well, but the level of variance is a lot tighter, and it's been studied and extensively as to the sort of optimal amounts of carbohydrate to take in, and kind of there is as close to there ever will be, I think, as a consensus on how much carbohydrate to take for different durations of activity. And what tends to drive the differences between what people need is less to do with individual physiological differences and more to do with the duration and intensity of what you're doing.
So it can differ based on duration in particular. Obviously lots of people will be thinking about the marathon. For shorter races and longer races, how much do you really need to be thinking about in terms of taking in carbs?
Generally speaking, if you're going for less than an hour and you're well fueled when you start, carbohydrate intake during the event is not going to be hugely beneficial to you. It's largely unnecessary. When you get beyond an hour, up to 2, maybe even 3, sort of 30 grams of carb an hour is the lower end of what you'd want to be taking in. And for a lot of people, it's going to be more like 30 to 60 grams of carb. For some of the elite athletes towards the higher end of that time frame, it gets up towards 90 grams. And certainly when you're going at a high intensity for longer than 3 hours, then sort of 90 plus grams of carbohydrate an hour is not necessarily essential, but it's often linked with a high level of performance. So it's kind of 30, 60, 90 grams tend to be the roughly the recommended amounts, with an increasing dose as duration and intensity increases.
Brilliant. And a lot of people will immediately think of gels, as they're very big in the running community, but can you get this from any sources? Is it, obviously certain advantages, I guess, different types, but it's just get those carbs somehow?
Yeah, the fundamental thing is getting carbs into your system. We all probably intuitively understand that eating a Mars bar when trying to run as fast as you can in a marathon is difficult, and that's why slurping down a gel or taking a sports drink is preferable. Yeah. I think sports drinks with lots of carbs in work really well for shorter and more intense events, when you are breathing really hard and when you just want something quick and digestible, and you don't want to have you don't need a separate drink because you're not losing as much sweat. You can just have an all-in-one drink. When you're doing a marathon or upwards, a lot of people like to start to separate the carbs from the fluids, especially in hot weather, because you may need a lot more fluid, and if you try and take all of that in with lots of carbs, it can lead to stomach upset. So gels are probably the most happy medium, which is why they're so popular with runners. Yeah. They're very light to carry. They're very you get a lot of carbohydrate in a small mass. So you can, at a push with most of them, take one of them, and you don't need to drink immediately. You obviously want to drink with them to help swallow and digest them, but if you have to take one and then wait a few minutes to get to an aid station to pick up a drink, you can do that. So tactically, especially if you're running fast, they offer a good way to get carbs in.
Brilliant. So when it comes to actually portioning it out, lots of gels come in 20 grams, but their range has changed quite a lot recently. I've started to notice more high carb gels in the market. Yeah. Is there an advantage to having several doses an hour, or should you go all in?
Yeah, that's another good question, because you're right. It used to be that energy gels were mainly sort of 20-25 grams of carb, often funny different amounts. We just bought one out that's 30 grams, and we're going to do a 90 gram one as well. Because people are looking for like more clarity on what's in the pack. Because if you've got numbers to hit, you don't want to be trying to read the small print and trying to do maths on the fly. You just want to know what's in them. I think that generally speaking, the more some of the gels, you have more volume in them. So some gels claim to be isotonic or such like, and that they've generally they have higher water content to carbohydrate. So you might have, say, 60 or 70 milliliters of gel, which only delivers 20 grams of carbs, right, which is quite a lot. And that makes it easier to swallow, but it means you've got to eat more of them. Okay. I'm personally a bit more in favour of like a higher concentration of carbohydrate and then washing it down with a cup of water or something. Yeah. And I think, given the choice, what you would do is you would drip the carbohydrate in frequently, so maybe every 15-20 minutes throughout the hour, rather than taking it all in one go. So that might mean if you were a fast runner aiming for 90 grams of carb an hour during a marathon, you might take that every you would take a gel every 15-20 minutes or something like that. So you're putting it in regularly. There are circumstances though where tactics or the profile of the course doesn't allow for that, and then you might have to be more tactical about like taking a large hit of it all at once. I think the only golden rule really is you don't want to do anything that really upsets your stomach, because if you do, that can cause you to slow down. So and some people just basically have a more iron gut than other people. Some people you can just can throw all sorts in there and run along fine. Other people are very sensitive and they need to be more careful about what they're taking in and when.
Brilliant. And actually on that, when it comes to different kinds of gels, I look into gels a lot. I love eating a lot of carbs, and I've got obsessive about things like ratios of glucose to fructose. Yeah. How much of that is noise and how much is it, no, there's really good backing of these kind of things?
Yeah, the stuff about different types of carbohydrate in the gels probably started to become interesting 15 years ago, when they started looking at the fact that your gut can absorb approximately 60 grams of glucose an hour.
Okay.
You know, that seems to be a sort of average human rate limiting factor for glucose transport from the gut into the bloodstream. If with fructose, you can absorb about 30 grams an hour, and it uses different pathways into the stomachs, into the bloodstream, from the gut. So that's where the kind of 90 gram number comes from, is that if you have a 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose, the idea is that your gut can transport that into the bloodstream more cleanly. It's a bit like being at the supermarket and one, checkout aisle is blocked and they open a second one, and you've got the glucose aisle can take a bit more than the fructose, but combined you can get a lot more through. So a lot of sports nutrition products have a kind of basically 2-to-1 glucose fructose ratio, and that seems to work for a lot of people. In honesty though, with a lot of the elite athletes we work with, they will eat and drink all sorts. Of all sorts of different ratios, because it's very rare that people use just solely one product the whole time, and there is science to back up the idea of using different carbohydrates to get better transport through the gut, but that is in the noise compared with taking the right amount of grams per hour. Getting the right amount of grams per hour is fundamentally the most important thing, and that's something which people should focus on first before they start getting too caught up on what the ratio of carbs is.
Brilliant. So you could use the gels that you like, as long as you're hitting the number, you can stick with them, basically.
Yeah, and you'll get feedback from your body in respect to the fact that if you can't tolerate them very well without GI upset, that maybe it might be then worth playing around with different types of sugars or different brands of gels or whatever. But fundamentally, it's sort of hit the numbers that you want to hit with whatever product you prefer, and then see how your body reacts. I think that we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty as anyone. We get very caught up in the sort of like the minutiae, don't we? Of this pair of shorts have got this sort of liner, or these shoes have got this carbon plate or not, or whatever. And we sort of deep down know that a lot of that stuff is kind of in the noise, because really what it's about is putting the miles in and training hard. But I would say with the nutritional side of things, the first priority is getting the right numbers in. Beyond that, it's like a lot of personal preference.
Brilliant. Now, you mentioned dehydrated stress a couple of times. Now, I know lots of very keen runners. I know some very quick runners who go, I can't take more than 2 gels in a marathon.
Yeah.
So is it literally a case of, well, keep trying different gels, train your body, you can work on it, basically?
Yeah, you can, 100%. It is about training your body. Like, the body's incredibly adaptable. The thing that highlights that is that crazy Nathan's hot dog eating championship that goes on in America on the 4th of July, where guys will eat 70 hot dogs in 10 minutes or whatever it is. And they are living proof you can train your gut to absorb more food if you are sufficiently motivated. So that's the kind of example I use to people who say they can't tolerate very much. It's not to say that you won't be able to. If you progressively overload, like if you go out the door on day one, you will, and you've never run before, you will struggle to run a mile. But a year later, if you persist with it, you will be able to run 26. You know, with your gut, if you put a little bit of carbohydrate in to start with, even if you're not used to it, it may not be comfortable, it may not feel great, but you will get used to it, and you will see. It's one of those things where it's basically proven you will see performance benefits from being able to take more. So certainly a lot of the elite athletes that we're working with now, in the last 6 to 8 weeks before a competition, are trying to fuel in their biggest training sessions like it's a race. Okay. And if they can, they're trying to increase just very slightly the amount of fueling they're taking in through that 6 to 8 weeks up to the race, to try and find the ceiling and find a little bit of extra. Brilliant. Because 9 times out of 10 that will result in a better performance on the day.
Fantastic. And actually, because I just on my 22-mile training run ahead of my marathon, I deliberately took more carbs even though I was going to take in a marathon. Is there a case of, can you go too far if you don't get any distress? Is it just go as crazy as you want, or?
Yeah, like with anything, you can definitely go too far. I would say as a rule, it's more common to see runners under fuel rather than over fuel. I think cycling, it's kind of, we work with a lot of cyclists as well. It's easier to eat on a bike because you're not jiggling up and down, and you've just got pockets where you can carry as much as you like effectively. With runners, to calibrate people's thinking, I would say if you're not, you're probably not doing yourself justice in a marathon if you're not hitting 60 grams of carbs an hour if you're trying to run quite fast. But if you're going much north of, probably in my experience, 100 grams, I wouldn't necessarily say there's huge performance gains to have there. I mean, everybody is a bit different, and I have heard stories of 120, 140 grams an hour with some people, but they're very much in the category of anecdote and hearsay rather than robust science. Like,
Fair enough. Talk a bit about personal experience. I'm sure you've got some stuff about how you get. A lot of people go, well, I'm not getting drink service. I'm not getting handed things. What do you do? So, for example, I will take quite a big running belt and I will pack in loads of stuff. And I basically have made the decision now that that's helped my performance so much. I don't even want to think about, oh, maybe I'm losing, a second here because I'm carrying a bit more stuff at the start of a race, and it's always used up, after so much time. Anyway, so that kind of thing you would do when you were doing your racing, what you've seen.
Yeah, I would say probably carrying energy is more. It's the cost benefit analysis of carrying your own energy is probably more tipped in the favour of benefit versus say carrying your own fluid, because we know in most running races you can get access to lots of drink stations, and water and sports drinks are heavy. So if you're a typical sports drink if you took 500 millilitres of it, that's going to weigh half a kilo and it's only going to give you 30 or 40 grams of carbs. Right. If you carry an energy gel, which, to use the example of ours, is 50 grams in weight, you've got 30 grams of carbs there, you've got a lot of bang for your buck there. That's not going to slow you down much carrying a few of those. You've reliably got that energy you can intake, and you can pick drinks up on the way around. So for most people who aren't getting the elite experience of being able to pick their own stuff up en route, I'd say carry your preferred source of energy, or at least the majority of it, and then look to pick up fluids along the way.
Brilliant. And then let's get to the nitty gritty of planning out your marathon. People are on board. Are there tools out there on the Precision Hydration website that can help them really map out their fueling? Because I always think you never want to make a decision during a marathon or a long race. You need to make it beforehand.
Yeah, that's a really critical point. You need to be working this out well in advance, because all athletes, myself included, go completely off the rails and crazy on race day or the day before. You're not in a good mind space to be like making critical decisions then. So we've built something called the Quick Carb Calculator, which sits on our website on the pages where you find the energy gels and drinks and things, and there's a little button that says tell me how much I need, and you click on that and it just asks you some questions. What sport am I doing? How long am I going for? What intensity? And it will give you an idea of how many grams of carb per hour. And then of course it's pretty easy to work out from our product range whether it's like, if it's 60 grams, that could be 2 gels an hour, or a bottle of energy drink plus a gel or whatever. And so that tool is one of the earliest ones that we put together just to get people in the right ballpark to start figuring their own numbers out. In the works as well, we have got a more comprehensive fueling and hydration planner coming together, which is going to be released hopefully later this year, and that will give you a really highly specific plan for a marathon or an ultra or a triathlon or whatever it is you're doing.
Brilliant. So when I do my marathon plan, and we'll talk about making it, I will often have a big carb drink just before I start as well. Should I count that as part of my nutrition, or is it really on the go that you count?
When we do an athlete's race analysis of carb and fluid and electrolyte intake, we will count whatever they take in the last 20-30 minutes before the race in the in-race intake, because it takes 15 minutes or so to get into your bloodstream, so we kind of put that in those numbers. Not everyone does that, but that would be my approach. Is I would say that's a good idea to sort of count that in, and then kind of keep a running total from there on.
Brilliant. And then people, when they think about fueling for marathon, they also always think about pasta parties, that kind of thing. When it comes to a pre-long event kind of fueling, is it about spacing it out over several days, or really will that one big pasta meal do you? How's it going to work?
There's a lot of people, the carbo loading thing became like a thing of mythology, didn't it, with pasta parties the night before events, and a lot of athletes have undone a lot of good training by being overstuffed the night before. I would say though, unlike hydration, where you don't want to be just drinking the days before, increasing your carbohydrate intake over the last 2 or 3 days is really, really important. And the way you can read about like grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight in order to do it scientifically, but I always think a really intuitive way to do it is just to say, I'm going to eat my normal meals, my training is tapering off, but with each of those meals I will have an extra portion of carbohydrate. So if I normally have for breakfast, I would have maybe eggs and toast, I might also have a small bowl of porridge with that on the 2 days before, or a bagel or something like that. With my lunch, I might have an extra portion of rice or an extra potato or something like that, and the same with dinner, just so that you're just making sure that you're really are making sure you've got that adequate top up of carbs, because your body, when you've been training hard and then you start resting up, you can store about 50% more carbohydrate than the average person. When you're fit, it's called super compensation, and it allows your muscles to hold on to and absorb more carbohydrates. And if you space that out over the last 2 or 3 days, you are going to put on a little bit of body weight, in terms of it's not going to be body fat, but it'll be weight that's got because you're storing glycogen and water with it. But that is invaluable on race day, because that maybe extra kilo or half kilo is going to give you the extra fuel tank to draw on once you get started. So you don't need to basically do it all in the last day. I would say start 2 to 3 days out and just ramp it up a little bit.
Brilliant. And during the race, I think another thing that people get wrong is when you get going on your nutrition plan. I thought that's another thing that elites maybe do a lot better than amateurs, is that the amateurs just delay, but actually there's no reason to.
No, I would say starting longer. The longer and harder the race, the earlier you should start fueling. And that's where having a robust plan to stick to matters, because if you leave it to intuition, you won't feel like taking a gel after 25 minutes of a marathon. You're barely settling down your heart rate and things like that at that point from the adrenaline of the start. But you want to start early and just start dripping it in, because that is going to set you up for success in the latter stages.
One thing on types of carbs is we're really all talking simple carbs and sports products. So if you're maybe someone who avoids those in your general diet, maybe don't worry about it so much on race day, I guess.
Yeah, there's a real sort of I guess juxtaposition of what constitutes healthy food to eat for most people day to day, and what makes a good sports food.
Yeah. And
a good sports food is everything that your dietitian would tell you not to eat on a regular day, because it's a high glycemic simple carbohydrate that's going to spike your blood sugar and going to provide quick energy. It is like there are studies. There's a fantastic study done in the US where they looked at the effect of taking fast food, regular fast food items that you could buy from like any of the big chains, and supplementing them in with athletes instead of sports nutrition products. And they basically found that when it was kind of blinded, I think they were just as effective. Wow. Because they are effectively, it's simple carbs. Yeah. And so when you're burning them, they are the best thing to put in to give you that energy. But they're definitely obviously not the thing to be eating on a regular basis if you're not training, because they're not going to do you any good.
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, there you have it. That's really the biggest change you can make. I think it's certainly the biggest change I found as a marathoner was getting my fueling right. It made a lot more difference than buying some very fancy shoes. I do have those as well. Now, we've got obviously lots of advice given in this and the hydration video. If you have any more questions, please do write them in the comments. We're going to collate a load of those and then fire them back at you again, Andy, if that's all right, to really get some nailed down advice for the viewers in the next video in the series. But for now, thanks very much for your time, Andy. And yeah, this has been great.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on.